Good morning and thanks so much for joining in. You're watching Ask Profit on NDTV Profit. My name is Alex Mathew. Now, this show aims at getting you answers to all of your stock-related questions, whether they're short-term or long-term in nature. We will soon be joined by a fundamental expert and a technical advisor, and they'll get all of your questions answered. If you've got those questions for us, you can send them to us on that number that you see at the bottom of your screen, or in fact on any one of our social media platforms. Let's get you a check of where the markets are right now and what they're doing. Let's talk about the benchmark, because what a show. After the crack that you saw yesterday, you're seeing buying come in once again, and you are at the high point of the day in trade today, above the 22,400 mark comfortably as we speak, with gains of about 2.4%. And let's also look at the broader markets to see what's happening there. And similar gains in both the mid-cap as well as the small-cap index. The mid-cap index up about 2.8% or thereabouts. The small-cap index up about 2.4%. So buying interest evident. Incidentally, I want to point out, and we'll get you those voices a little later in the show, but I was speaking to representatives of two mutual fund houses, and they both told me that they saw inflows yesterday, which is not surprising if you think about it, because the Indian mutual fund investor and the investor in general has changed the way that they approach investing in the Indian equity markets. Let's talk about a few stocks in particular then. In fact, let's focus on the gainers on the benchmark Nifty 50 and say which of these stocks are contributing to the biggest gains. HDFC Bank, which was down in the dumps yesterday and among a sea of red, is now gaining ground. It is the top contributor, but the top gainers on the Nifty 50 include Hero MotoCorp, which is up as much as 8% in trade. HUL continues to gather momentum and ground. It's up as much as 7.7%. Mahindra & Mahindra, possibly on the back of a rural theme that will play out, is also gaining about 6% or thereabouts. Nestle continues to gain ground. ITC, only about 5 losers on the benchmark Nifty 50. The likes of Larsen & Toubro, BPCL, Grasim and Power Grid losing ground in trade today. SBI more or less flat after the kind of crack that it saw yesterday. I'm joined by Vaishali Parekh as well as Ashish Kapoor today, and they're going to answer all of your questions. And I do want to start with you, Vaishali. Heartening signs to say the least, and you're seeing quite a good bounce from the low point yesterday.
Very good morning to all of you. Yes, yesterday's move was very drastic. And purely on technical terms, we believed that 21,250, which was nearly the low made yesterday, that should hold on. And we were expecting a bounce. And today also we are sustaining well about 22,350. So if this momentum continues, I think this bounce back is further to go on till 22,600. I won't say it's a conclusive bottom made, but I would say good levels to start accumulating, because market would continue to be choppy till we see the final outcome on the 9th. And I think 20,600 should act as a main support.
Okay, and so therefore the range is quite wide, understandably so. Ashish, I'll come to you in just a moment, because I want my colleague to take us through the major development on Hindalco, which is not doing too much in trade, but the development is quite significant. Novelis has shelved its IPO plans. The implications for Hindalco is what we need to discuss. Kanika is joining in to tell you more. Kanika, what are you picking up?
Now, in what could have been one of the largest listing this year by an Indian-owned company, Novelis has announced postponement of its IPO due to market conditions. Now, the company has mentioned that market conditions did not support achieving their expected premium outcome, and Novelis will continue to evaluate the timing of their offering in the future. Now, Hindalco had planned to sell almost 7.5% stake in the company, with an IPO price band ranging between $18 to $21 per share. Now, including a greenshoe option, the total proceeds could have gone up to $1.09 billion. But and on the capex front, Hindalco had planned to spend rupees 6,000 crore in this financial year. But without the IPO proceeds, Hindalco might need to explore alternate funding sources, or will need to reconsider the scale and timing of its capex projects. Coming to valuation, the IPO was targeting a valuation of almost $12.6 billion, attributing 2/3 of Hindalco's market cap to Novelis. But because of the IPO coming in, the SOTP value ascribed by brokerages, which was almost 790 to 850 rupees per share by Motilal Oswal and Anand Rathi respectively. Now, per share value of investments given by them was rupees 49 and rupees 37 respectively, which includes the share of Novelis. Now, and at the upper end of the IPO band, there was a valuation premium. That premium has escaped even though Novelis stays in the business now. Now, the particulars of all of this is a big question mark.
That's a well put statement. It's a question mark. Let me take that question to Ashish then. And the largest implication, of course, is for Hindalco. Ashish, and good morning to you. What would you do with Hindalco at this juncture?
Hi, good morning. I think, it has just got postponed, and my best understanding would be that it's a matter of time before the IPO comes. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And I think if I'm holding Hindalco, I'll continue to do so because generally the metals are doing well and likely to continue doing well. And Hindalco is one of the very well established players in the metal space. So I don't see any difference happening. I think continue to hold on to it.
Fair point. That's a view on Hindalco. It's time to jump straight into the questions, and quite a few of you have already written in. Just a quick reminder, if you're just tuning in, you can send your questions to us on that WhatsApp number on your screen. The first question I will take is, we have an update. In fact, at the bottom of your screen, what you see is breaking news. Mr. Chandrababu Naidu may demand or make certain demands. He may demand one ministerial berth per 3 members of Parliament is the latest development that we're seeing. He may demand as many as 5 ministerial berths in total. Remember, not too long back, you had Mr. Chandrababu Naidu address a press conference to talk about the assembly elections, where he has said that he will, in fact, take the role of Chief Minister. This is, of course, the latest development. We'll bring you more updates as we get them over the course of the day. For now, let's jump to the first question. As I pointed out, Deepal Thakkar has got the first question. He's asking about Jain Irrigation. He's looking at a technical view. He's bought at levels of 71 in November of last year. The stock is currently trading at 60, though it's up about 10% in trade today. He's asking, should he book losses or hold on? Vaishali, what's the view on the charts?
In a hurry, let's wait and watch because it's really not damaged to that extent. If it breaks yesterday's low, then yes, of course, one should exit because today's move, I think it is showing a bit of strength. And once the stock moves above 64, 65, he will regain the momentum and he will get his levels of 70 to start with. And above that, I'm looking at higher targets too. So I would say it's better to average out these stocks.
All right. The next counter we're talking about is ABB, and it's a question from Prakash. He's bought at levels of 3,400, and this is a stock that has, by and large, outperformed over the course of several months. It's currently trading at 7,719, so well above the buy price. In fact, it's a doubler for Prakash. The question is, Ashish, should he hold on? What's the view on ABB?
Well, I think certainly hold on. I think capital goods segment is doing very well, and this company has got its growth momentum back. Doing very well. The returns have been very fantastic. Quarterly results, quarter to quarter, they are doing pretty well. So I think even both the industry and the stock is doing very well. Again, very well established MNC. So I don't see any reason why you should sell or. In fact, you could look at buying opportunities on any decline.
The next counter we will talk about is HAL, and it's another counter that got battered just a tad bit. It's not just a tad bit. In fact, it got quite badly battered in trade yesterday. It's down about 1.5% in trade today. The question is coming in apologies. I've been asked to hold HAL for another day and talk about Infosys. So this is a question coming in from Aman Kukreja, and he's bought Infosys at levels of 1797. Should he average at the current juncture? Vaishali, what's the view on this?
I would definitely agree so, because right now we are seeing that IT index has really not performed and participated. And right now it's showing momentum, but I would say even for a long-term perspective, it makes a lot of sense to start accumulating good IT stocks. So of course, Infosys is the top of the line. One should accumulate from here on.
Okay. All right. One more question we will take, and then we have to address the political developments that you're seeing on the screen. Entero Healthcare is the name of the counter, Vaishali, and this question is coming in from Satya, asking for a 1 to 2 year time horizon. Would you buy at this juncture?
Let me have a look because I'm really not tracking the stock. So let me see. Entero, the one which is 1,000 up. So I would say, there is really nothing much happening. All I can say is that there is a good consolidation going on at 1,000 levels. Unless and until the stock moves above 1,100, 1,150, I would say it's a range-bound stock. The clarity comes only above 1,150. So fundamental input is required right now if the stock has got any meaning, because technically I would say hold, wait for a breakout to 1150.
Okay. I did promise that we will speak about this latest development, but we're just going to hold on just a tad bit before we do. Sushila from Bellary is asking about SJVN, bought at levels of 101, 502 shares. Should you hold or exit is the view. Quick view, Ashish?
Well, I think should hold on. I think the company will do well in the coming time. I think should hold on.
Quick view on the charts, Vaishali. Do you have that, SJVN?
So yes, I do have it, and I would say exit if 120 levels break, because that could call for a further corrective move going towards 100. So right now it's in a safe zone, but below 120 it would call for that.
Okay. Several stocks on this list, the likes of Bharat Electronics as well as Tata Elxsi, Data Patterns, NHPC. Which would you buy at this point, Ashish?
BEL for sure, Tata Elxsi also. I didn't get the other two.
So BEL, Data Pattern as well as NHPC.
Okay, if I have to choose, then it will be BEL and Tata Elxsi. If I have to choose two or multiple four.
Okay, fair point. It is now time to talk about the latest political development. Of course, there's a lot that is shifting, that is moving, and we've got Tamanna to break down this latest development for us. Chandrababu Naidu addressing a press conference earlier today. What is the latest development about?
So many things happening in the last half an hour or so, Alex, as is expected in this time, action moving thick and fast. So Chandrababu Naidu's press conference, definitely a balm to the markets. You're seeing that kind of recovery coming in. And essentially because he made it very clear he's with the NDA, he's going down to Delhi, and, there is really no doubt that he will be part of the NDA. But we've been speaking since this morning about what's the quote-unquote pound of flesh, and more details coming in right now on that. In fact, this is a story by Vikas Bhaduria of the NDTV network, and his sources telling him, and we'll get him on the phone in just a second, his sources telling him that the TDP is demanding the post of Speaker and one ministerial berth for every 3 MPs. So if you see, out of the 16 seats that they've got, even if I do a conservative sort of calculation, that's 5 ministers. Now, this is a negotiation. Right, this is the first leg of the negotiation. Now, the pictures you're also seeing on your screen is of Mr. Nitish Kumar taking that flight from Patna to Delhi. There's an NDA meet later this evening, so crucial for Nitish Kumar to be there. Right behind him is Tejasvi Yadav of the JDU, who's part of the India Alliance. So that's an irony and an interesting set of pictures there. Now, if this is indeed the set of conditions put forward by the TDP, then as being the other important alliance partner, and almost equally important, because 14-16 is the split between the TDP and the JDU. We should get those numbers on the screen of how many seats each of those alliance partners have got. If there is in fact a 1:3 formula, then that is something that Nitish Kumar is very likely to also demand. So we don't know how it will go, but that's going to be interesting. I don't know if we have that soundbite of Chandrababu Naidu that we had clipped from the conversation earlier, but it would be very key to note what he was saying. And he had this huge victory speech this afternoon, talking about how this was a new beginning, etc. But he also reaffirmed his presence in the NDA. Listen in.
We are in NDA. I am going for NDA meeting. In course of time, anything, we'll report to you. Thank you.
All right, so we just clipped out the little bit of English, speech that he gave. Of course, the bulk of the conversation was in Telugu. So 2 or 3 things that have happened,
yes.
Alex, if I have to put it succinctly. One, that it's very clear that Chandrababu Naidu wants to be with the NDA. He's part of NDA. He was part of NDA before the election results came in, and he doesn't seem to be moving from there. Nitish Kumar, we haven't heard from him yet. There has been no speech yet, but there are no signs of concern. So the question about whether the allies will come on board, yes, they do seem to be coming on board. Now the rest is about at what cost and what do they demand.
I was just going to ask, you know, when I read it on the screen, Tamanna, I must admit that it didn't sink in till you explained what that meant. 5 ministerial posts is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that also then comes into what the size of the government is, how many ministries you have, because if you have to accommodate, now this is what coalition politics looks like, Alex. A lot of people have forgotten because you haven't seen that in the last 10 years. But, you know, and you've seen stages in the last 2 terms of the NDA where you have one minister with multiple ministries handling more than one thing. Here you have to accommodate everyone. And now you're going to have negotiations to the extent of MOS, independent charge, which of the big ones where there are actually big policy decisions to make, all of that comes into play.
So my question is then, is the concern that some people have raised warranted? And I remember UPA 2 and UPA 1, which were coalitions obviously, or UPA 2 was certainly a much weaker coalition than UPA 1, where you saw allies getting quite marquee portfolios, and they were focused on their own constituency. So is there a dilution of the overarching theme that the BJP might have?
No, but when you're comparing it to UPA 1 and 2, look at the proportion of the BJP seats.
Yeah.
BJP has 80% of the seats in the NDA. And the fact is that technically you had a coalition government right from 2014. It was NDA 1, NDA 2, and now is NDA 3. Led by the BJP, yes. As majority, but they are still with the lion's share. Do I have? So I have Vikas Singh Bhaduria on with me. Vikas, ये बताएं कि आपके सूत्र क्या बता रहे हैं आपको कि टीडीपी की क्या डिमांड्स हैं?
ये देखिए, हमारे सूत्रों ने ये जानकारी दी है कि टीडीपी जो है वो इस गठबंधन में, एनडीए में बीजेपी के बाद सबसे बड़ा दल है। ऐसी सूरत में वो बार्गेन ज्यादा करेगी और टीडीपी की तरफ से जो मांग स्पष्ट रूप से सामने उभर कर आ रही है वो ये है कि एक लोकसभा अध्यक्ष और हर 3 सांसदों पर 1 मंत्री पद। ये टीडीपी अपनी डिमांड रखने वाली है एनडीए की बैठक से पहले, जब इंडिविजुअली वो पार्टी अध्यक्ष जेपी नड्डा और गृहमंत्री अमित शाह से मिलेंगे, टीडीपी प्रमुख चंद्रबाबू नायडू, और उसके बाद एनडीए की बैठक में भी इस बात को रखेंगे। टीडीपी को पता है कि उसकी ताकत इस समय ज्यादा है और वो बार्गेनिंग करने की स्थिति में, इसलिए ज्यादा से ज्यादा गेन करने के लिए वो अपनी बातें यहाँ पर रखेंगे। इससे पहले आपको पता है कि 1999 में जब टीडीपी वाजपेयी सरकार का हिस्सा बनी थी, तब भी जीएमसी बालयोगी को उसने लोकसभा अध्यक्ष बनवाया था और तब भी टीडीपी उस अलायंस में दूसरा सबसे बड़ा दल थी। और आज फिर से 2024 में वो स्थिति है कि टीडीपी सबसे बड़ा दल है बीजेपी के बाद, और ऐसी सूरत में टीडीपी की तरफ से ये मांग रखी जाएगी। लेकिन देखना होगा कि बीजेपी लीडरशिप उनको किस तरह से कन्विंस करके कम से कम पर राजी कर लेती है। लेकिन फिलहाल की जो सबसे बड़ी खबर है वो ये है कि 1 लोकसभा अध्यक्ष और 3 सांसदों पे 1 मंत्री पद, तो इस तरह से 5 मंत्री पद और 1 लोकसभा अध्यक्ष टीडीपी अपने हिस्से में चाहती है।
तो विकास जी, फिर नेक्स्ट जो लॉजिकल सवाल है कि अगर टीडीपी ये मांग कर रही है तो फिर जेडीयू ज्यादा पीछे नहीं रहेगी? कम से कम इसी तरह की मांग होगी। तो अगर इनके 16 एमपी और उनके 14 गिने, यानी 9 से 10 मंत्री पद दोनों अलायंस पार्टनर मिलकर मांग सकते हैं, क्या ये कहना ठीक होगा?
जी हाँ, बिल्कुल। देखिए, अगर टीडीपी के साथ इस फॉर्मूले पर बीजेपी सहमत होती है तो निश्चित रूप से बाकी अलायंस पार्टनर के साथ भी उसको इसी फॉर्मूले पर सहमत होना होगा। 2014 और 2019 में हमने देखा है कि बीजेपी ने 5 सांसदों पर 1 मंत्री पद दिया था, और लेकिन अब 2024 में ये जो बार्गेन पावर है निश्चित रूप से बाकी दलों की बढ़ गई है। तो जो फॉर्मूला तय हो जाएगा एनडीए की बैठक में 3 सांसदों पे या 5 सांसदों पे 1 मंत्री पद, उस फॉर्मूले के तहत न केवल टीडीपी को बल्कि जेडीयू को भी ऑफर करना पड़ेगा। और निश्चित रूप से यहाँ पर जो भी फॉर्मूला बनेगा वो सभी दलों पे लागू होगा, न केवल एनडीए के जेडीयू और टीडीपी बल्कि और भी जो छोटे छोटे दल हैं उन सब पर इसी फॉर्मूले के तहत
ये बात भी सही है। जो शिवसेना दल हैं उनके भी 5 या 6 सांसद हैं, तो सबको वो देना पड़ेगा। विकास जी, बस एक बात समझना चाहूंगी। एक तो हुई मंत्री पद की बात, और फिर कौन सा मंत्रालय, इंडिपेंडेंट जज, MOS एक्सेट्रा, वो सब आ जाता है। दूसरी बात है स्पीकर की डिमांड। क्या ये सबसे एक मुश्किल चीज होगी किसी भी एलाई पार्टनर को मांगने के लिए, क्योंकि ये बीजेपी छोड़ना नहीं चाहेगी?
जी हाँ, बिल्कुल। देखिए, जब अलायंस की सरकारें होती हैं तो हर दल ये चाहता है कि उसका लोकसभा अध्यक्ष रहे, ताकि जो संसद में बदलते हुए गणित हो, समीकरण हो, उस पर उसका कंट्रोल रहे, क्योंकि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है गठबंधन की सरकारों में, और तब जब स्पष्ट बहुमत की सरकार ना हो। तो ऐसी सूरत में बीजेपी की कोशिश होगी कि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष उसी का रहे, लेकिन चूंकि एक बार टीडीपी के हाथ लोकसभा अध्यक्ष लग चुका है, ऐसी सूरत में वो फिर से कोशिश करेगी कि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष उसी का रहे और कंट्रोल एक तरह से उसके हाथ में रहे। हालांकि बीजेपी के पास बहुत बड़ा स्पष्ट बहुमत तो नहीं है, लेकिन फिर भी संसद में एक सबसे बड़े दल होने के नाते उसके पास एक, कहते हैं, मनोवैज्ञानिक बढ़त है। तो ऐसी सूरत में देखना होगा कि बीजेपी इस मांग को किस तरह से लेती है। और सबसे बड़ी बात है, लोकसभा अध्यक्ष हमेशा उस दल को दिया जाता है जिसके साथ दो दलों के बीच में सबसे ज्यादा भरोसा हो। बीच में खटास आ गई थी टीडीपी के साथ बीजेपी के रिश्तों की, दोनों दल अलग अलग चुनाव भी लड़े पिछला, लेकिन इस बार 2024 में फिर से एक साथ आए हैं। अब देखना होगा कि ये भरोसा कितना दोनों नेताओं के बीच या दोनों दलों के बीच मजबूत होता है, और ये इससे स्पष्ट हो जाएगा कि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष टीडीपी को मिलता है कि नहीं मिलता है।
तो अगर दोनों दलों की तुलना करें, दोनों अलायंस पार्टनर्स की तुलना करें, तो विकास, आपके मुताबिक भरोसा कौन से दल पर ज्यादा है? कहां पर समीकरण ज्यादा बेहतर बन रहे हैं, चंद्रबाबू नायडू की तरफ या नीतीश कुमार की तरफ?
ये देखिए, मुझे लगता है कि इससे पहले बीजेपी भी बार्गेनिंग करेगी कि वो इस स्टेज पे पहुंचे कि हमें किस पे ज्यादा भरोसा करना है। वो बीजेपी की कोशिश बार्गेनिंग में ये होगी कि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष उसके पास ही रहे, ताकि कंट्रोल बीजेपी के पास रहे, और निश्चित रूप से संसद के सबसे बड़े दल के रूप में उसका पास ये अधिकार होगा भी, और वो इस अधिकार को सुरक्षित रखना भी चाहेगी। लेकिन अगर ऐसी सूरत में स्थितियां बनती हैं कि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष उसका नहीं रह पा रहा है, तो फिर टीडीपी को ही लोकसभा अध्यक्ष देना, मुझे लगता है कि इससे पहले की जो सरकारें नहीं उसमें दिया है, तो टीडीपी का दावा ज्यादा मजबूत बनता है, उसको दिया भी जा सकता है। लेकिन ये बार्गेन की टेबल पर ही तय होगा। हाँ। जब समझौते का टेबल होगी उसी पे तय हो पाएगा कि आखिर क्या सौदा हो पा रहा है।
नहीं, ये बात तो सही है कि अब इस समय तो हम बात करें कि क्या मांगे रखी जा रही हैं, उसके बाद क्या दिया जाएगा वो दूसरा स्टेप है। लेकिन इस बीच जब मंत्रालयों की बात हो रही है, और ये एक बड़ा सवाल है कि किस तरह के मंत्रालय अलायंस पार्टनर्स के पास जा सकते हैं, इस पर कोई कुछ रोशनी डाल सकते हैं आप?
ये देखिए, अभी तो एकदम स्पष्टता नहीं है, क्योंकि किसी भी दल ने अपनी तरफ से पत्ते नहीं खोले हैं। अभी फिलहाल कोशिश ये है कि पहले फॉर्मूला तय हो जाए कितने सांसदों पे कितने मंत्री पद, और उसके बाद फिर सेकंड स्टेप होती है किसी राजनीतिक दल की या राजनेता की, कि फिर वो बार्गेन करे कि ठीक है, आप मुझे 5 मंत्री पद दे रहे हैं, तो अब मुझे ये मंत्रालय चाहिए, और फिर उस पर बार्गेन होता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि शपथ ग्रहण इस बार थोड़ा सा लंबा खिंचेगा, और बार्गेनिंग जब तक पूरी नहीं हो जाएगी तब तक शपथ ग्रहण नहीं होगा, क्योंकि शपथ ग्रहण होने के बाद अगर मंत्रालय के बंटवारे में देरी होती है तो फिर इसका जो मैसेज होता है वो बहुत ज्यादा खराब जाता है। सरकार के नेतृत्व के ऊपर सवाल उठता है, लीडरशिप के ऊपर सवाल उठता है, और ये खराब मैसेजिंग हमें नहीं लगता है कि बीजेपी या प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जाने देंगे। वो सरकार का शपथ ग्रहण समारोह जब तक चीजें तय नहीं हो जाएंगी तब तक करना पसंद नहीं करेंगे। लेकिन ये बात तय है कि तमाम जो दल हैं वो ऐसे मंत्रालयों की मांग ज्यादा करेंगे जो उनके राज्य की अपेक्षाओं को पूरा कर पाए, और ऐसी सूरत में अर्बन डेवलपमेंट मिनिस्ट्री से लेकर ग्रामीण विकास मंत्रालय और कृषि मंत्रालय तक पर नजर है। रेल मंत्रालय पे खास तौर पर जेडीयू की नजर रहती है, क्योंकि रेल मंत्री खुद नीतीश कुमार रह चुके हैं। ग्रामीण विकास मंत्रालय पर नजर रहती है, क्योंकि बिहार में जो ग्रामीण का इलाका है वहां पर काफी जिसको कहते हैं कि विकास की संभावनाएं हैं, और ये जो मंत्रालय ऐसे हैं जहां पर बड़े लाभार्थी वर्ग भी खड़े हो सकते हैं इन मंत्रालयों के जरिए। तो दोनों मंत्रालय, अर्बन डेवलपमेंट मिनिस्ट्री, ग्रामीण विकास मंत्रालय, उपभोक्ता मंत्रालय, ये ऐसे मंत्रालय हैं जिन पर रेल मिनिस्ट्री फाइनेंस मिनिस्ट्री, जिन पर सभी दलों की नजर होती है। तो देखना होगा कि अब ये एक बार फॉर्मूला तय हो जाए तो किस तरह से मांगों पर आगे बढ़ते हैं ये तमाम राजनीतिक दल।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया विकास, ये सारी बातें समझाने के लिए। विकास सिंह भदौरिया देयर ऑफ NDTV नेटवर्क with that massive story. This one's huge, Alex.
It is fascinating, and it goes back to what we were discussing just before he joined in. Some of those very juicy ministerial positions.
That's an interesting word. Yeah.
that look very attractive to the allies because they know that they're far more important than they have been in the last 2 terms.
Right. And railways, I think, is the big one because look at the plans which have been put forward. The rail budgets have been huger and huger every time. So there is a lot to do. And I think also the important part that Vikas said, because these are both very strong regional leaders, they have to think about their states as well.
Constituencies, absolutely.
So ministries which help them further what they have promised to the people of Andhra Pradesh and the people of Bihar.
So it's going to be a balancing act for sure. It's going to be very interesting to watch at the very least.
Yeah.
Tamanna, thanks so much for putting all of that into context. And of course, we will be talking about this through the day and in the coming days as well. So please do stay tuned and watch NDTV Profit for all of the news and analysis in the political theatre as it develops. We're completely out of time, unfortunately, on this particular edition of Ask Profit. I'd like to thank both of our experts, Vaishali as well as Ashish, for joining in and answering all the questions that they did answer. Unfortunately, we had to curtail this program. Thank you so much for understanding. Viewers, we'll be back in just a few minutes to take you through what's happening with the markets. Do stay tuned.
Welcome, this is Hot Money. I'm Agam Vakil, and we're taking stock of all the advances that are coming through as far as the markets are concerned. In fact, the Nifty at the moment is advancing by quite a bit. We're looking at a gain of around 1.8%. A lot of recovery coming in for the Bank Nifty as well. And the Bank Nifty will be in focus on account of the weekly options expiry today, but can't rule out any choppiness. But, as far as the constituents of the Nifty go, once again, we do have some amount of strength returning to some of your key benchmarks. Of course, in terms of contribution, we have something like an HDFC Bank, something like, an M&M, an Infosys, an HUL. All of them are looking at contribution towards the upside. Don't have too much in terms of stocks which are in fact coming off. That said, even in terms of your broader markets, we've seen some amount of recovery there. If you consider just the key mid-cap and the small-cap indices, the mid-cap index up around 2.4%, the small-cap index is also up around 2.2%. There's been just a little bit of an underperformance in the small-cap index with respect to the other relatively larger indices. That's something to keep in mind as well, not just today, but yesterday as well. And again, we continue to give you an update on the markets. For now, markets are looking steady. It does seem like we're getting a breather at the moment after the sharp fall and the increase in volatility that we've seen. But we shift focus to the bond markets, and we have Suyash Chaudhary. He's the head of fixed income at Bandhan AMC, who's joining us on the show. Suyash, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining in. Suyash, we were just going through one of your latest notes on the current state of the economy, in which you actually talk about three factors, three pillars. That's the current account, the fiscal deficit, and inflation, where all these three factors are coming together, and we can expect a continuity, a little bit of consolidation. Can you give us your wrap and your analysis here?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Our fundamental premise is that India fixed income is probably at the start of a structural market, and a lot of factors have aligned for this to happen for India. So you referred to, the three macroeconomic variables that constitute macroeconomic stability, which is current account, fiscal, and inflation. And all three have been consolidating at a reasonably rapid pace. And importantly, a lot of this is policy driven and not just a happy accident. So on current account, our services trade surplus run rate has improved by roughly $5 billion per month over the last 3 years, which has cut our current account deficit by in excess of 1% of GDP at headline level. RBI is an institutionalized inflation targeter, and government has been complementing with supply side management. And fiscal consolidation for India is there for all to see. So not only was the post-pandemic response well organized, but there has been speedy consolidation, including a favorable mix in spending. Second, this amount of consolidation now is happening at a country size, which is very difficult for large institutional global investors to ignore. So India is already a top 5 economy. In the next foreseeable future, we become a top 3. So we are not, any sort of a side story where even though there is good macro, large global fixed income investors can ignore. That's not the case anymore. So we think, they will have to enter India. And the third, which is the index inclusion, is a great facilitator for them to start to pick up more India exposure. And we think it's a multi-year trend and not just restricted to $20-25 billion. And fourth, if you see the way US macroeconomic policy is progressing, it is basically characterized by fiscal dominance. And this is now a multi-year problem where probably over the next 9-10 years also, US fiscal deficits refuse to consolidate. This is also backed by high current account deficit. And if you put the geopolitical and boundaries that are being created and the de-dollarization that is happening in select parts of the world, probably barring cyclical interruptions, the dollar is on a secular downtrend over the next few years. And that would greatly benefit well-run emerging market macro stories like India. So if you put these four factors together, we think India is pretty much in a structural market. And, the bar for that to turn is fairly high. And, some minor change in political structure is not going to change it, is basically our view.
Suyash, good afternoon, Neeraj here. I mean, yesterday the moves, sentimental as they would have been in large part notwithstanding, One of the feelings is that what if, and it's a presumption, of course, in some parts, what if the nature of the spends changes? The government, the new NDA, or the NDA, may not really tweak the fiscal glide path too much. But what if the nature of the spends changes, wherein it goes towards some populist measures or some welfare schemes, as opposed to what inherently the purse would have been largely used, which is capex infrastructure? Does that alter the way the longer term trajectory of how fixed income investors, albeit even global equity investors and thereby flows, look at India and impact on flows thereof?
So that's a great question, Neeraj. Let's look at the size of the potential risk that you are flagging. And first of all, it's important to figure out what all constitutes macroeconomic stability. So I spoke about inflation, current account, and fiscal dynamics. Now, we don't think RBI changes colors at all. The inflation targeting is pretty much institutionalized in India, so that risk you can basically eliminate. As far as current account is concerned, this rise of global capability centers and so forth, which is leading to a change in our services trade surplus dynamic, which in turn has led to current account compression at a headline level, probably is also a very great theme and does not turn because of some minor tweaks in government policy. The biggest risk is what you pointed out, which is fiscal risk. But there also, one has to look at the size of the issue. See, a 10, 20, 30 basis point change in either expenditure mix or expansion in deficit will not change the India structural bond story. And we don't think, there is any need to speculate that the basic characteristic of the mindset of the government and the way they have approached macroeconomic policy is going to turn. So at best, or at worst rather, the risk on the table from a market standpoint you're looking at is a slightly slower pace of consolidation on fiscal deficit from here on, and probably a bit of a skew change in favor of revenue spending. Bear in mind that the government is on path to consolidate deficit by almost 500 basis points by next year from the peak that we had achieved at the peak of the COVID crisis. Now, that scale of fiscal consolidation is truly noteworthy and has to be rewarded by global investors. So, like I said, the bar for India macro story and the structural bond market story to turn is much higher than a 20-30 basis point shift as a percentage of GDP in either expenditure mix or fiscal deficit trajectory.
So yes, the other aspect therefore is what happens to the two key variables, which is yields as well as INR, because a lot of it has also got to do with global factors, particularly, of course, with the Fed rate trajectory as it shapes up in the second half of the calendar, if there is some movement there. But also the belief that maybe near term, because of the event that's happened yesterday, if we see some outflows, and we saw some outflows yesterday, but if we continue to see outflows in the near term, does it have a material impact? What's your sense about the near term and the medium term trajectory of both the bond markets as well as the currency markets?
So first of all, one has to realize, as we have been speaking, India is a great macroeconomic story. And second, bonds are cheap here. So whether it be versus forecasted inflation, and even assume some 20-30 basis point volatility on inflation, or versus the repo rate, bonds are cheap, right? So there is a whole lot of valuation cushion as well when we speak about bonds. Now, to your point, let's look at the near set of factors. Obviously, the greatest clarity market will get with respect to the stance of the government is going to be in the budget, the union budget. And, we are just looking forward to confirmation of what we are already thinking, that there are only going to be minor tweaks. However, while we wait for the budget to happen, there are quite a few positives that are stacking up for the India fixed income market. One is a cut in bond supply for first half of this financial year. Second is the impending JP Morgan index inclusion, which will attract some additional passive flows probably. And third is, if you see over the last 2 to 3 weeks, there are now distinct signs that the US economy is beginning to weaken. Albeit we have seen US data being volatile, but for whatever it's worth, what we are seeing over the last 2 to 3 weeks is distinct signs that the labor market is weakening, consumer spending is weakening on the margin. and wage trends are pretty much stable, and which is reflected in bond yields coming off as well. So as far as we are concerned, the final test is going to be the union budget. We don't expect anything, much dramatic to happen there that will change our view on India bonds. However, for more skeptical investors who want to wait out, there is still reasonable short-term positives on the table, which should probably keep bond volatility at bay as far as India fixed income is concerned.
So Yash, you also briefly alluded to the de-dollarization. You also spoken about de-premiumization of certain US assets. And in your note, you also mentioned US moving towards fiscal exceptionalism. Can you explain this and as to how this can in fact work when it comes to the US markets?
So actually, that's a very important point, and which is also in some sense getting manifested in global portfolio flows as we speak. So you'll recall that in 2 years post-pandemic, US ran a fiscal deficit of roughly between 12 to 13% of GDP. Especially with the benefit of hindsight, you may argue that part of it was probably too much, and much more than just shoring up weaker personal and corporate balance sheets in the country would have dictated. However, moving on, even the pace of consolidation in US fiscal deficit has been quite slow. So it's a bit of a head scratcher that today there is a central government or federal government level deficit which is around 6% of GDP, even when economic growth there is slightly above trend. Meanwhile, interest costs are creeping up. And, so for example, if you look at the Congress Budget Office, which is a bipartisan entity's forecast over the next 7-8 years, it's unlikely that there is any meaningful consolidation in US fiscal deficit. Now, current account to some extent mirrors expansion in fiscal deficit, because if you assume that households and corporates are constant, any expansion in government saving should reflect in higher current account deficit. And that's precisely what the US is now seeing. Current account deficit levels of almost 3% of GDP, even though they have achieved oil autonomy. Now, if you put this together with geopolitical evolution, basically you can argue that there is, like we said, a depremiumization of US dollar, which is already underway, which means that you still recognize dollar is the reserve currency of the world, but the premium you want to give to hold US dollar assets is shrinking. One way to us this is showing is narrowing yield differentials between US bonds and bonds of other well-run macroeconomic stories like India. But there are many others around the world as well. And second is, this step up in gold demand, which is probably breaking a lot of historical correlations. Ordinarily, you would not see 5-quarter, 5-half US cash rates and still this bit of a gold demand. So we think, although in the near term, US bonds are the pain point for global fixed income, over the medium term, this de-dollarization trend, or more importantly, the de-premiumization trend that we are already witnessing, will potentially lead to further narrowing of bond spreads between US and other well-run emerging markets or other well-run markets more generally. And India is going to be a very obvious beneficiary of those bond flows as well.
All right, so Yash, we'll leave it at that. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out. Well, you're watching NDTV Profit. We slip into a short break, and on the other side, we get you more stocks. Stay tuned in.